When the shot is much quieter, it's way easier to hear the reaction on target. So whether you're shooting steel, you're going to hear that ding, 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 that clang, clang, clang a lot louder and a lot more clearly. When you're hunting game, I was just hunting elk in Montana a few months ago and shot an elk at 300 yards. And I'm telling you, I heard the sound of the meat slap louder than the sound of the shot. It's kind of just that normal kind of nail gun type sound, almost more of a whoosh than a bang. And then it just sounded like on the other side of the mountain, Mike Tyson going to town on a side of beef. That was way louder than the shot, which is cool. That's nice to know as a hunter, especially an ethical hunter, that was a hit.
Welcome to Aimpoint's Taking Aim podcast. I'm your host, Rich Nance. Here we'll take a deep dive into firearms culture and the Second Amendment lifestyle. From hunters to veterans, competitive shooters, police officers, tactical trainers, 2A advocates, and even some well-known celebrities, we'll cover it all. Today I'm sitting down with Joe Kurtenbach. Joe is a fixture in the firearms industry. He's an Army veteran. He got his start with NRA Publications, where he worked his way up to executive editor of American Rifleman. And I met Joe at Guns and Ammo, where we did a lot of work together on Guns and Ammo TV and in Guns and Ammo magazine. And Joe now works for Silencer Central. Stay tuned. And so I want to get just a little bit more background, Joe, because that was kind of a vague and generic introduction, but I want you to fill in the blanks a little bit for me. Let's start with talking about your military experience.
Yeah, I was a dude who joined the Army. I actually enlisted after college. I had a high school professor in history and politics that was a combat officer from Vietnam. Had a lot of respect for him. He always spoke highly of the other officers and the NCOs that he worked with. And so he kind of inspired me to, after college at Virginia Tech, going into the Army, and I actually enlisted and I had a plan, right? Everybody's got a plan. Going to go in for a year enlisted and drop an OCS packet and go and become an officer. But so I started off as a 19 Delta Cavalry Scout, and I got sent to Korea right away and did a year in Korea, which is a great place to train. You kind of knock out all of the touristy stuff in the first couple of months, but then the North Koreans were kind enough to shoot a missile over Japan, and I spent most of my time on the DMZ. But again, great place to train. I got to come back stateside to do some Raven UAV training, and I had just gotten around to dropping that OCS packet when I got a call from a special operations recruiter to come do PSYOP. I had scored super high on language stuff. I had scored super high on, just some of the cognitive tests that they do on you. And they said, "Do you have an interest?" And I said, "Well, what does it entail?" And it turned out I was going to get to kind of fulfill my Army checklist. I was going to jump out of airplanes, learn a language, and continue to travel. So went from being a 19 Delta Cavalry Scout to 37 Fox, which is Psychological Operations Specialist. Basically did some cultural analysis type work over there. And then my enlistment was up and my wife and I were ready to settle down. So I'm just a dude who joined the Army and did his job. Nothing special, no crazy adventures or anything, but had a good time. Got to jump out of airplanes, learn a language, and travel.
Well, you're modest. That seems like quite a bit to me as a municipal police officer for my whole career. So that seems pretty adventurous to me, Joe. Now, what about firearms? At what point did you have a strong interest in firearms? Was that prior to your military service or during?
Yeah, so I grew up in a house that we camped and hiked all over the country, so the outdoors was very familiar to me, but not any firearms in my family. My dad hunted as a kid in small town Nebraska, but not really part of our family life growing up in the suburbs of DC. But the cool thing was, through the Boy Scouts, I actually got, introduced to firearms through some of the summer camp activities, marksmanship merit badges and stuff. And I distinctly remember hiking out in New Mexico at the Philmont Scout Reserve out there. And one of the stations we came to, we actually got to load our own 30-06 ammunition, and then and then go shooting with it and everything. And I remember that.
That's cool.
I just thought that was so cool, and for a at the time young teenager to kind of get to do that and kind of handle some of those sporting firearms, really military conversions into sporting firearms. It was a really cool experience and one that stuck with me. And so then in the military, I mentioned, I spent a lot of time on the DMZ doing the training. So we got to train and shoot a lot. I mean, we were on the DMZ for months and months. And so everything from heavy weapons on the vehicles down to our individual firearms, our M4s, really got a solid background in the military doctrine of marksmanship, small unit tactics, that kind of thing, especially as a Cav Scout. And then moving into special operations, I pretty much stayed in small unit tactics the whole time. I was never in a big line unit, thinking about, big regimental or divisional or battalion advances. It was pretty much everything I did was either small reconnaissance units or small special operations units carrying out missions. So got a lot of small unit tactics, individual marksmanship, super important when there's not very many of you. So that was really fundamental. And actually, when I started working at NRA and got off active duty, I went to the National Guard, and I was back to being a Cav Scout in the National Guard. And we got to do quite a bit. We were actually getting spun up to deploy, which we didn't ever deploy with that unit. But we were getting spun up for it, which meant a lot of qualifications. So my first couple of years at the NRA, when I was also in the National Guard, man, I spent a lot of time on the range, put a lot of rounds downrange, got very proficient in some of those, especially individual rifle marksmanship and using some of the heavier weapons.
Yeah, that's cool, Joe, because not only did that kind of shape your, give you a good foundation in understanding how firearms work, but also how they can be applied in the real world. And I think that's been a big part of what's helped you be so successful in the, writing and outdoor TV arenas. How did you come to work for NRA Publications? In other words, have you always been a good writer, or did you major in journalism? How did you take your love of firearms and make a career of it?
Yeah, I applied for a different job altogether. I applied to be a field rep in the Northern Virginia area. So I knew when I was getting off active duty down at Fort Bragg, I knew my wife and I were moving back up to Northern Virginia where both of our families were. And so I was kind of looking around for jobs, and I had, a couple of defense contractors, and then I saw the NRA field rep, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, but I applied for that job because I thought that might be kind of fun and different and not a full-on extension of what I was doing before, but something on a little bit different but related field. Well, I didn't get it because somebody from Ohio that was already an employee wanted to move to the Northern Virginia area where the NRA headquarters was. So I didn't get that. But I had a great conversation with, at the time, Linda Crouch. I think she's still at the NRA, running HR. And she had a nephew that was in the Army. And we just had a great conversation, even though I wasn't getting the job that I had applied for. And she said, "Hey, I remember, in addition to your business degree, you've got an English degree. Like, we have this opening for an assistant editor on American Rifleman." And I've been getting American Rifleman since I was probably 12 or 13 years old. Would you like to apply for that? And I did. And I remember, I went through the I was actually doing the interview process for a defense contractor and for NRA at the same time. And I remember the visits, like the on-site visits and interviews, couldn't be more different. On the one side, kind of a cubicle farm and, kind of the kind of people you would expect to find populating those areas. And on the other side, some of the writers that I had kind of grown up reading, mounts and taxidermy on the walls, guns being talked about everywhere, every corner you turn, and I was like, man, this is pretty good. So I actually got an offer from both companies that I was interviewing with on the same day. And it was the day before my wife and I were leaving for a belated honeymoon. And I remember I turned to her and I said, "I'm going to take the NRA job, and I'll do that while I look for a real job." And I mean, and it's been what, probably 14 years since that conversation. So yeah, I guess I still haven't found that real job, and I don't really want to. I really love what I'm doing.
Nice, man. I remember you and we met a long time ago at FTW, which doesn't stand for what many people may think it does. But you were with NRA at the time, and we kind of hit it off and had a good time at that event. And then I know that, of course, I was writing for Guns and Ammo, and I know that a lot of people there were really interested in recruiting you over, and you came over, and that's when you and I really, really got to spend a lot of time together, filming, training, and of course, you telling me my articles suck and change this and that. I'm kidding a little bit, but no. So we had a good time there. Tell us a little bit about your experience, your take on your time with Guns and Ammo. I should say Outdoor Sportsman Group, which includes Guns and Ammo and several other publications, as well as the Outdoor Channel, Sportsman Channel, and there's even some new networks that I can't even remember because it's just in the initial launch phase, but a lot of exciting stuff going on. Tell us a little bit about your experience at Outdoor Sportsman Group.
Yeah. So, I mean, just going back to NRA real briefly, the nice thing there was they gave me plenty of leash, and my very first my very first week on the job was actually a television week there. So I got exposure to the fact that these are multimedia brands right off the bat. I wasn't on TV my first week on the job, but I was pushing the gun cart behind the camera crew everywhere we went. So good exposure there, had great bosses over there, Mark Keefe especially, kind of teaching me the ropes about how to be in front of the camera and be successful there, but what also needs to happen behind the camera to make the whole shoot successful.
Yeah. Isn't it weird though, Joe? I mean, sorry to interrupt, but some people can be the most articulate person you'll ever talk to.
That red light comes on.
Oh man. And they just
they fall to pieces. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I think
it's weird.
It's like anything. It's practice, it's exposure. And I was fortunate enough to have a boss who gave me those opportunities and who put me out in front of the camera as soon as and as often as he could. So I kind of got to see what made that successful. And of course, I was able to progress pretty quickly from that assistant editor role up to executive editor of American Rifleman, and then actually the manager for all their digital media for a short period of time before I went to OSG. But the main thing is they gave me all the tools to succeed there. I got to see people who had been in the job for a long time doing it the right way, and kind of take in those lessons into myself and apply them to my work. And then, the call comes from OSG to come over and join the Guns and Ammo team, which at the time was just Eric Poole and the contributors. The staff was really limited. So I was going from a staff of 7 to a staff of what would be 2. And so there was plenty of work to be done, but I thought it was going to be a good challenge. And I got to jump right in right away and not just contribute on the magazine, but also kind of take over and revamp the TV show, kind of change the way we were doing things there, jump in and have a pretty strong hand on the direction of the website, and and work with knuckleheads like you, but also some really good contributors on the
I try to keep a balance for you, Joe. It's funny. You say that, you had some changes that you made to Guns and Ammo TV that you implemented. I think that's important. It doesn't mean anything was wrong before that. It's just that these shows that run forever. I mean, Guns and Ammo TV has been going for, I don't even know.
More than a decade, I think.
Yeah, more than a decade for sure. So after a while, you got to kind of revamp those things to make it interesting and to keep it fresh, I think. So, but no, you have kind of a unique perspective as far as in front of the camera, behind the scenes, digital, print. I mean, you have a lot of stuff going on, which I know is one of the things that made you valuable to Silencer Central, which is where you're at now. And as we're getting through your resume, we might as well start veering in that direction a little bit, because we have a lot of other stuff we can get to. But let's get the background stuff out of the way. So you've been with Silencer Central just a short time. Tell us what your title is there.
Yeah, so I'm the senior manager of media and relationships. So basically, I was able to kind of take all the things that I've learned, all the people that I've worked with, and come over to a really exciting and growing company in Silencer Central and Banished Suppressors, and kind of jump right in there. They've never really had anybody doing this role of really coordinating the media side of things, working with our partners in media like OSG, like American Rifleman, like our influencers and ambassadors, but also be able to bring a lot of industry relations experience and knowledge, help them grow partnerships with other manufacturers, whether they're suppressor manufacturers, firearms, ammunition, anything in our industry. I was able to come over with a lot of great relationships in place, and that was valuable to them as much as it's valuable to me. And so I've kind of been able to leverage my experience in multimedia, my experience in the industry, the relationships that I've built, and just kind of hopefully become a great ambassador for the brand. And then on the inside, help them really build the processes needed to create their own media, or kind of, keep those pipelines flowing with great content, great ads, and great ambassadors in our media partners.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I learned as I started writing for the gun magazines in like 2008 is like there is a lot of turnover in the firearms industry. So you may know a guy from one company for 2 or 3 years and associate that person with that company, and then that person within a 5-year span is with several different companies. So what I've learned to do is just make friends with good people, and you'll all help each other out no matter what company they're with. So, there's certainly enough room at the top for us all. And no, I could see how you are a valuable asset to Silencer Central. So let me talk a little bit about my experience with Silencer Central and suppressors or silencers in general. So being from California, I sort of, I didn't want anything to do with it because I couldn't have it.
We can't deal with you people.
Even as a cop, Joe, I couldn't have it. It had to be agency purchase and all that. So I was sort of like, if I can't have it, I don't want to know anything about it. Well, a few years ago, I moved to Arizona, and now I can have them. And now I do have a couple. And Silencer Central, let me go back a little bit. So in April, I went on a safari, a plains game safari in South Africa. And we were hunting with Mossberg Patriot rifles and Banish backcountry suppressors.
Yep.
And that was sort of my first experience, certainly my first experience hunting with a suppressor, but also the most time I've ever spent with a suppressor, which included a 3-day safari prep course at Gunsight Academy. So I learned that it just makes everything better. There's no downside.
Right.
I mean, it's going to be better for your ears. But what also was interesting is it makes you better in the field hunting because as you're firing, you can actually hear the impact. Whereas if you hear that loud, the loud bang from the rifle, you're not going to hear that bullet impact the animal. So that's really beneficial. And then even like in training, so when we were at Gunsight, all online, like say 10 of us firing rounds for, round after round. Yeah, you have hearing protection in, depending on caliber and everything else. But out in the field, I didn't find I needed it at all. And it was just that suppressor is going to keep things quiet enough. Just makes everything better. Now, the downside, and this is quite a downside that this is a code that Silencer Central has cracked, obviously, is it's such a pain in the ass to get a suppressor, or it was such a pain in the ass to get a suppressor.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's intimidating, man. I mean, you got to pay a couple $100 for the tax stamp and everything else, but it was such a slow process that it would take months and months after you pay this and apply for this to get anything back. And now that whole process is streamlined. So what I learned from that experience hunting in South Africa was that Silencer Central, more than anything, is like a process for obtaining suppressors. Of course, they have their own house brand, right? The Banish brand, but they also sell suppressors from a lot of other companies, right? People may not understand that. So maybe this would take an hour or more for you to talk all the way through, but maybe just talk in general terms how Silencer Central has simplified the process of obtaining a suppressor and made it sort of demystified it.
Yeah. Well, at first I want to touch back on you and your fellow California residents, your former neighbors. Man, such a rich hunting and shooting culture in California, like super rich hunting. I mean, Peterson's publications were out of California originally. Unfortunately, not the way it was, but still on the firearm side and the ammunition side, lots of sportsmen and women out there, lots of shooting culture out there, just unfortunately tampered down by government regulations and untouchable to us. So while it is still vibrant, you see all those gun companies that constantly get their firearms added to the California roster. There's a reason. There's a great customer base out there. Unfortunately, because of California's laws, they're off limits to
Yeah.
suppressor companies. Going into the process, yeah, the great thing about Silencer Central is, our founder and CEO, Brandon Maddox, had a vision where you could actually get suppressors shipped to your door. And basically that led him to kind of get local FFLs in every single state, in all 42 states where suppressors are legal, and build out the process, that really fits the Amazon culture of today. You can shop online or you can call over the phone, and our experts will help you find the suppressor that's right for you. And you made a great point of, it's not just the Banish suppressor line. We love our Banish suppressors. We probably make and sell more of those than any other suppressor line in the country. But we are a service. Silencer Central is a service provider, and we work with everybody. And increasingly so, every single day we're bringing new manufacturers online. So whether you want that silencer code, that Nosler, that FN, that Dead Air, or any of the other great brands of suppressors that are out there, like, we sell them, and we will ship them straight to your door. And that's kind of the great thing. We walk you through the process. We build the ATF paperwork for you. We'll do a free trust for you, which the ATF is super familiar with. And we will follow the progression of approval all the way through the process until that suppressor lands on your front doorstep. So it's really a system where you never have to leave your basement if you don't want to. You can order online and it'll be shipped to your door.
Yeah, I mean, it really was simple, and someone would be on the phone kind of walking you through as you're following along on the computer screen. Is this correct? Is this correct? Boom. I mean, it was as simple as it could be. And also it didn't take very long. Wait times are starting to get dramatically expedited, right? I mean,
yeah. I don't even want to say it on a podcast, but here we go. Like, I was just approved on a trust in 40 hours. My first suppressor years ago took 14 months, and I was just approved in 40 hours on a trust. Individual, basically you can file as either an individual or on a trust. Silencer Central will do a free trust for you, but no problem doing individual transfers either. The individuals are typically shorter, but I'm telling you, like, we are getting, especially for returning customers, approvals super quick. And there's no rhyme or reason, as to why some people are faster than others. Sometimes I think it's because, like, if you have a super common name like John Smith, just like at the firearms counter where your background may be delayed or take a little bit longer, I think the same thing kind of applies here. But the general theme right now is that wait times are coming way down. We aren't really talking months anymore. We're more talking days and weeks.
Wow. That's a tremendous improvement. Joe, for someone who may be unfamiliar with what a trust is as it relates to suppressors, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the trust is, because a suppressor or a machine gun is a NFA, National Firearms Act, regulated item. It's not as easy to transfer or to sell as, say, a standard semi-automatic firearm. And so the trust was a vehicle that really came into vogue a few years ago to kind of be able to put all of your NFA regulated items into one place, and then also add basically co-trustees or people that could have access to them, so that if you, Rich Nance, purchase the suppressor, but you want your wife to be able to use it, you can put her name on your trust, and then she now has permission. Because before, being an NFA regulated item, that possession of the item is kind of a sticking point. Like, if it is not yours, you are not supposed to have it.
Yeah, even if even if it's under your relative's name, that becomes. I can see how that would be kind of a mess. So yeah, not a bad idea to do.
So it's a nice vehicle to both have your NFA items consolidated kind of in one place, and then control access to them is probably the best way I would put it. Most people don't ever add anybody to their NFA trust, but at least they're all together. But if you wanted to, you have that ability to get family members or whoever, so that they would not be in trouble for being in possession of those items.
So we talked a little bit about California being a state where silencers are not legal. I believe they're legal in 42 states?
42. So it's like California and then the typical Northeast
Sure.
states, you would think, and Illinois are kind of the holdouts on that situation, which is unfortunate for the people in those states. And hopefully changing soon.
Are there any is there any legislature that you're aware of that's hopeful that states like California may also allow suppressors?
Yeah, so I do think that some of the recent cases, like the Bruin case in the Supreme Court, I don't know if that will have direct ramifications to this, but I think we have seen a bunch of court decisions that have gone in kind of the pro-gun, pro-freedom, way of things. I also think the incoming administration, you just kind of never know what'll happen, but I imagine there's going to be kind of far less tolerance for kind of the ticky tack state by state regulations. We see it even in concealed carry licenses and permits. I think just recently introduced was that bill to allow your whatever state concealed carry permit to be acknowledged and valid in all of the states. And there's always been that move for kind of that national reciprocity, and I'm hoping that kind of everything is, I think, trending in the right direction to make these more accessible for everybody.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, I think it's HR 218, if I'm not mistaken. So as a retired police officer, I'm able to carry in every state. And yeah, why wouldn't you have that same standard for private citizens?
Yep.
California is really weird because it's a may issue state. So you have to sort of justify your need to carry a firearm. And depending on what county you live in or what city you live in some instances, it's pretty easy to get a concealed carry permit. But in other areas where you live, no matter how good of a reason you have, which personal protection should be reason enough, in my opinion,
Yeah.
but no matter what your valid reason may be, you can't have one. As an example, my son, who was, in his early 20s, he was managing a gun store in California that a buddy of mine owned. And so he's going into and out of that store, opening and closing, unarmed
Yeah.
because he can't have a concealed carry permit. Yet he's an absolute sitting duck. Now, of course, in the store, he's able to carry. But anyway, that's just a prime example of, dude, if anyone needs a gun, it's someone who's opening and closing a gun store. That's going to be a deterrent to crime. Just
Yeah,
crazy.
I think those may issue states, are coming under more scrutiny. I think there's been a couple decisions in favor of freedom recently, kind of going straight after to kind of those may issue states. But ultimately, it comes down to are you better off, properly equipped? And I think most of us would answer yes. Kind of you shouldn't have to validate that. If you feel your situation would be improved by exercising your freedom to keep and bear arms, you should be allowed to. And I think suppressors should fall into the same boat pretty much because, as you mentioned, there are just so many advantages for hunting. It's not just the noise suppression. I think one of the most overlooked things is that recoil control.
I was just going to mention, yep, that absolutely.
Yep.
That recoil was lessened, so it's easier to keep that animal in the scope,
Yep.
right? But also, not just for your own hearing, but even just like to be less of a nuisance, like at a firearms range.
It's just plain
exactly.
civilized. Yeah,
it's crazy. And in South Africa, it's weird. It's the opposite of what we have. So suppressors are like you can just go buy
lots
one.
of places in Europe,
but it's
too.
firearms that
Yeah.
you can't. Very difficult.
Yeah, they're gun mufflers, man. And
Yeah.
in lots of places, just like we require our cars to be muffled, in a lot of places in Europe and abroad, you're required to have your firearm muffled. You are required to use a suppressor, or at least you're going to get the side eye from all your neighbors while you're shooting it, because, oh, look at that guy, he likes it loud. That's a person, he'd love to damage his ears, and so it's interesting because we get these politicians that, really want European style gun control, for example, but they won't give us European style suppressor control, which is to say none. So I kind of wish they would look in the mirror a little bit, but I don't think they're working off a fact sheet. I think they are working off emotion and what they believe their constituents want.
It's weird. I think somebody watched, the wrong James Bond movie or whatever, and decided that suppressors are this evil thing that's for assassins and everything. It's like that's like nunchucks being illegal because someone watched a Bruce Lee movie or something, and it just felt like this is the next thing that's going to be a deadly trend. It's like I've worked with nunchucks a fair amount as a martial artist, and I'll tell you that a novice is much more likely to strike themselves with it than someone else. And I mean, a silencer or suppressor, no matter how quiet it may muffle, it's not going to be silent. It's not silent. It reduces the noise
Yep.
for all the reasons we've talked about.
Yeah,
But
brings it
it's
down
not
to hearing
like,
safe.
yeah,
That's the goal. Some of them are pretty darn quiet, but they are not moving
yeah,
silent. It is not like you see in the movies. Especially on anything larger than a rimfire, you're going to have the report. But the nice thing is, and you alluded to this earlier too, is whether it's a hunting scenario or at the range, when the shot is much quieter, it's way easier to hear the reaction on target. So whether you're shooting steel, you're going to hear that ding, 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 that clang, clang, clang a lot louder and a lot more clearly. When you're hunting game, I was just hunting elk in Montana a few months ago and shot an elk at 300 yards. And I'm telling you, I heard the sound of the meat slap louder than the sound of the shot. It's kind of just that normal kind of nail gun type sound, almost more of a whoosh than a bang. And then it just sounded like on the other side of the mountain, Mike Tyson going to town on a side of beef. That was way louder than the shot, which is cool.
Yeah.
That's nice to know as a hunter, especially an ethical hunter, that was a hit, stay on target, see what happens.
And of course, for years, tactical teams, both military and law enforcement, have relied on suppressors. I mean, it has a tactical application as well. And so, yeah, we haven't really mentioned that, but of course, that's the case. If you're in a shoot house, say you're training in a live fire shoot house, suppressors are going to be helpful, versus unsuppressed rifles, right? I mean, your ears will thank you. So there's something to be said for that. And even having a suppressor on like a home defense AR or something is not a bad idea for those same type of reasons, right?
No, I mean, I'm a huge proponent. And in fact, we're gearing up to kind of do a suppressor symposium where we can address that specifically. Is there a role for suppressors in self-protection? And I think there is, especially in that home defense scenario. I don't think we're to the point yet where suppressors are so compact you might consider carrying them. But do I think having them with you in your truck or in your bedside safe, I think those make a lot of sense. If you take your carry gun and it has a threaded barrel and you look at something like our brand new Banish 9K, which is only 4 inches long, 2.7 ounces, at the end of the day, take your carry gun out, screw that bad boy on. It still fits into your standard bedside safe. And now if you hear that bump in the night, you're not worried about blowing out your eardrums too. You can focus more on handling whatever the problem may be. You talk about, tactical teams or armed citizens, on like their ARs or carbines or something like that. A huge advantage there because again, we're talking about more powerful cartridges with potentially more recoil and more noise, and being able to mitigate both the recoil and noise of those is good. It makes you more accurate. It protects your hearing.
And they need to be able to hear each other. So in other words, it's not only protecting their hearing, but it's preserving their hearing in the moment.
And their situational awareness.
Better communicate. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep. It's taking care of their situational awareness. It's eating up a lot of the muzzle flash a lot of the time. So kind of all the worrisome things you hear about, like brakes and compensators, suppressors kind of take care of that. And two, there's been a lot of improvement recently in carbine suppressors in particular, with basically controlling the flow of the gas as it goes out. Because a lot of us know if you shot a suppressed AR, for example, with kind of a legacy suppressor, chances were you were going to eat a lot of gas. It builds up the back pressure, and a lot of that escapes through the chamber there and out the ejection port right into your face as the shooter. And that's pretty unpleasant. It's hot and it's gross. There's been a lot of improvement in suppressor design to not only reduce the noise, not only mitigate the recoil, but control the flow of those gases so they still exit towards the front and don't come back into your face. And I think that has been really a huge game changer, especially for these tactical teams, these guys who are shooting a lot. And that includes, I guess, non-tactical teams, just people who are at the range a lot. Think competitors as well. People with high round counts, you don't want to be eating the gas shot after shot after shot. if we can reduce that, we should, because it's certainly not going to be good for you. But also it is a negative to your shooting experience, and suppressors are all about improving the shooting experience.
Very well said, Joe. So let's talk a little bit about training, because as much as you are very knowledgeable about hardware, I know that you are a big proponent of training. You and I have trained together. And tell us a little bit about how maybe your military background influenced your thoughts on concealed carry training, for instance.
Yeah, in the military, got to spend a lot of time on like the M4, became a subject matter expert, and one of the trainers for the units I was in on that platform. And so at least I if nothing else, I came in with a foundational understanding of kind of what it takes to teach people how to do these things, and the fact that you're going to have to also leave them with something they can practice. I think that's kind of those two elements. You want to show them things they don't know. You want to, I think, the personal approach is good in that if you can get, right there with them and look at their grip and look at their stance and look at how they are interfacing with the firearm, that's all very important to fix on site at the range there. But beyond what you do at that range, you also need to kind of give them the techniques and some things that they can practice themselves to continue improving on that path. And I think a lot of the instructors that you and I have both been around and trained with, kind of follow that model where it's going to be an up close and personal situation while you're at the range with them. But then you're going to be able to take drills and exercises home with you. I think Dave Spalding, grandpa to both of us, he's been instrumental for me, because almost everything he does, you can take home and replicate yourself. His standards are out there. There's kind of no confusion about them. And the practical applications of his drills are well known and easy to understand.
Yeah, I think that's a big point, because I've taken some classes from some very well-known instructors, and they were a lot of fun. We're doing some crazy shit, jumping out of cars and doing all this stuff and shooting around vehicles and through vehicles and this and that. It was fun, but there's not a ton of practical application to that course versus some courses I've taken, which are much more mundane.
Yeah.
But they make you question every little thing, like how you grip a pistol, which how long have we been gripping a pistol? And now someone's going to tell us something that's going to make us reconsider that very basic technique of gripping a pistol. So those are the classes that I think are more valuable. Not that your class shouldn't be fun, but it's got to be practical. You have to give the students practical material that they can take home and practice. And you said this perfectly, because you're not going to anchor those skills in a 2-day class.
Right.
Nobody's that good. Unless you're already super well versed, then you may be able to kind of immediately apply it. But for most people, going to a shooting class is probably going to be about realizing, okay, here's some things I don't know. And like you said, here's some drills that I could take from this instructor, or some advice at the very least that I can take home and continue to practice. Because if you go to a class and you don't practice the skills you learned in that class, it's almost like you didn't go to that class.
Yeah. And I think, there was a time, I think largely past at this point, but we did kind of see the glut of trainers a few years back where everybody was a trainer and opening up their YouTube and their Instagram and everything. And I think the unfortunate side effect of that, while there was some good knowledge being put out, I think there was also this draw to create an entertainment venue, to almost put on a show, rather than to teach a class. And some people, again, some of those people had really good knowledge to put out, but maybe as a student, you're kind of more drawn into the theater of it rather than the practical application and the ability to anchor those skills.
Yeah, and to be able to say, I trained with so-and-so, But when you go train with some of these people, and not all of them, but
there's a lot of patch collecting, that's for sure.
Exactly. A lot of these high-profile trainers will have 40 people in a class. And when you got 40 people on the line, how much of that individualized attention are you going to get? Like you said, like, hey, cam your offhand more, or grip tighter with your dominant hand, or whatever it is that you're going to say. You're not going to get that. All you're going to get is to meet this guy, take some photos with him, for the gram.
See him shoot.
Watch him shoot.
Yeah, watch him shoot
phenomenally well. But another thing too is that a lot of these there are great instructors, don't get me wrong, but there are also great shooters who you would think would be great instructors, but either they don't know what makes them so good, or they're not skilled at transmitting that knowledge to other people. So, yeah, you definitely want to go somewhere where you get some individualized attention, so that you're not just running drills and taking,
Yep.
selfies with some famous dude. And I say famous dude, it's nobody in this industry is that famous.
No.
Quasi famous.
No, I mean, I think there are there's a couple formats that work and that have kind of ascended and evolved and kind of proven out over time. And that's like, you look at like a gun sight, generally a 5-day format based on the fundamentals. And a lot of people are like, oh, I'm too high speed for that. I don't need to do draw by the numbers. But the thing is, you do thousands of reps in those classes. So it's a larger time commitment. That is not everybody can do that. Not everybody can take 5 days to go do a shooting course. But if you do, the nice thing is the skills that you are doing there, you do them so many times there that generally they're pretty transportable. Then you can bring them home because you've exercised them enough. I think the other format that really works is kind of that smaller class, 2-day course, even some 1-day courses where you drill down onto certain skills, drill them enough, but also go home with homework that makes sense. Basically, these drills teach you this and reinforce this. Here's some time hacks or some other standards to try and meet. This is what you can do at home. And I think that those are kind of and generally those ones, there is also support in that you can see those drills from that instructor online also, or they've got a forum, or they've got some other way of kind of keeping in touch with the community to make sure those standards are upheld, evolved, questions can be asked.
And one of the things we have today, obviously, is the ability to communicate with the people that we train with, whereas that would have been much more difficult, 15 years ago, when you don't necessarily have this dude's email or phone number that you trained with. So now there's a lot of that. And I think most instructors are really good about, if you pay for their class, they're going to get back to you within reason and try to help you to make sure that you understand their material correctly. Another thing too is, I think that a lot of us, the tendency is to think that, well, I already know that, like you talk about gun sight and the 250 pistol course, for instance. I already know that. I've been shooting for a long time. Okay. Well, I think Dave says this, just because you're bored with something doesn't mean you're good at it. Right. So how many times have you or I taken a course from Dave? I've taken so many Dave Spalding courses that I almost know, okay, well, here comes this. He's going to talk about this now. But it's because I learn a little bit more every time. And just because you have a cursory knowledge of something doesn't mean that you've anchored those skills to the degree that you may need them in a defensive situation.
Yeah.
And also the complicated part is, not only do you have to anchor all these different skills, whether it's reloading, controlling recoil, conducting a malfunction clearance, shooting from an atypical position, you have to be so good at that stuff that in the heat of the moment, you're able to focus on your adversary and not shooting from a kneeling position or reloading your pistol. And so you have to really train to that level of what they call in law enforcement, and I think military as well, unconscious competence, right? Where you're almost automatically doing things the right way. And that comes only through practice and repetition.
Yeah, I've never taken a foundational course or a essentials course or a course that I had taken before. I've never taken the content multiple times and found myself coming out slower or worse at it. Generally, because you have that familiarity and you've built in some of that competence, it allows you to think of the next levels, the next pieces. I'm not drawing by the numbers necessarily while they're drawing by the numbers. And if you go to a place like Gun Sight and you go multiple times, basically you'll get a pat on the shoulder from one of the instructors that says, okay, you got it. You keep doing what you're doing. It's all good. They are not trying to slow you down. They're trying to make sure you have those fundamentals, because once you have the fundamentals of the draw, well, then it's like, then you can start working on things like the fast acquisition of your sight picture, the controlled press of the trigger. You can work on all those other steps because you've got the one down. And I think it's not just the draw, presentation, and shot. It is any skill in this arena where if you are getting better and better at the fundamentals, then you get to start improving your skills at the more nuanced pieces or the more difficult pieces or the more advanced techniques.
Yeah, and advanced techniques is a great term because really, how many advanced techniques are there when it comes to shooting a pistol? To me, I think advanced techniques as, you know, as you alluded to, getting behind cover, recognizing and shooting from behind cover, and maybe that requires you to shoot from a different position other than standing. You may have to shoot at a target that's not completely frontal, right? Like we typically do at the range. Um, and also, like a lot of the stuff that I focus on, which is the close quarter pistol work, I think that also, some people may call that advanced. I don't know that if it's advanced, but it's dealing with kind of a different problem because at that arm's length, um, you know, contact distance weapons are at play, whether the guy has a hammer or a stick. Even hands and feet can make a difference at that distance. So basically, just showing people how they can use unarmed skills to augment their pistol skills in that close range, I think is very undertrained, and it's really one of the most important things you can do after you're able to shoot at more traditional distances, like say 7 yards and out. You
Yep.
need to learn to address that close quarter problem as well, because it's not just a shooting problem.
Yeah, and I think the skills are translatable, right? I mean, we did a lot of
Yes.
work together for Guns and Ammo on personal defense topics, and often discussed, especially with the close quarter stuff that you were so familiar with, or even with longer range marksmanship with a handgun, how it's still the same draw. It's
Yes.
it is still the same trigger press. It is there is so much that is still the same that those
Yes.
essential skills come into play. The situation may be different, but the skill set is the same to solve that problem.
Yeah, it's all about recognizing a threat and then getting your gun between yourself and that deadly threat. Just how you do that is going to be dependent on the particular circumstances that you find yourself in. So good stuff there, Joe. Hey, this is Aimpoint podcast, so we'd be remiss, I guess, if you and I didn't talk a little bit about red dots. And I know that you're a fan of pistol red dots, so am I. Quite frankly, a lot of the people that were staunch, like iron sight advocates,
Yep.
many of those people have also transitioned to using red dot sights, and I just think that it's so much better for me, particularly because partly a vision thing. Like I can't see the front sight as crisply anymore, and if I have glasses now, I can't see the target at 25. So it's a much simpler view for me as far as aiming a pistol. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts on red dots on pistols.
Yeah. So my first comparison is nothing original. People have heard this before, but I can attest to it in personal experience, which is, when I was learning to shoot a carbine, I had to qualify on iron sights. And, frankly, on a rifle, one of the easiest platforms to learn to shoot iron sights on because of the multiple interfaces with your body. So you have more contact with the firearm, and two, the longer sight picture between the front and rear sights. It's one of the easier platforms, but still, when I was able to put a red dot on that sucker, man, everything changed. You were faster. They called them reflex sights,
Yes.
when I was in, for a reason. You could shoot
Yep.
them so fast. You didn't have to line up multiple sights. If the dot, anywhere the dot was in your vision, if the dot was on the target, you were good to go. Go to town, get to work. And the same is true for handguns. The difference being, handgun iron sights is one of the most difficult skills to master.
Yes.
So with carbines, it's one of the easiest iron sights. With handguns, it's one of the hardest. In both cases, the red dot makes a ton of difference. There was a lot of talk back in the day about, oh, but it takes so many repetitions to anchor this skill and to get used to it. It's like, no, bro, it's your same presentation. Like, stop
Yes.
thinking about it and just do the presentation right.
Well, there's always going to be a little bit of a learning curve, right? But it should be relatively small if you're drawing consistently to begin with.
Right.
So if you don't have a consistent draw stroke, you're going to really struggle with the red dot because you're going to see a window with no dot in it, and it's typically high. Not always, but it's typically high. One of the things you can do, obviously, is cam that your offhand wrist or pinky pressure here. Those two things both kind of bring the muzzle down. Another thing, like Dave likes to talk about, is it could be a little left or a little right, but it's not going to be tremendously. It's not going to be you're aiming here and have to adjust to here. It's going to be you just tighten your grip. So as you join your second hand, by tightening your grip, it sort of like funnels
Yeah.
that window so that the dot will be right in your field of view. So now there is a little bit of a learning curve, but most people just pick up the gun and just go like this and they can't find it. And they're like, this is dumb. Or they try to use their iron sights first.
Yep.
And that's problematic because that's inherently going to make you slower. Because if you find your iron sights first before you hunt for the red dot, that's not a good thing. Also, when you're looking at the red dot as though it were a front sight, that can be distracting because even though that dot is not moving around any more than a front sight is, it's a lot more prominent, which is the whole purpose of having a red dot. So it can be distracting if you wait for that dot to be perfectly still. So you just have to focus on the threat or the target. And then your mind is going to see that dot because you can't miss it, right? And then you're going to just, as long as you don't do anything during your trigger press that's crazy, your round should be right where you were aiming.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I don't want to totally belittle the training aspect of transitioning to the red dot, but I do think it's overblown. I think generally the people that need training on a red dot needed training anyway, mostly because it's anchoring those essential skills. Like it's the same people who because they like to shoot their handguns at 100 yards, from the ready position, didn't think that they needed to spend more time on their draw to get that consistent index so that that gun is always where they expect it to be in rapid fashion, on the draw. And I think if you have a consistent draw, a consistent index between, where you're bringing the gun into your sight picture, the red dot is no different really than your iron sights. And then you get to just start enjoying the benefits of it, which is no multiple sight planes. You're just imposing the red dot on top of the target.
Yes. And a lot of people say, well, at close range where I'm typically going to be involved in a gunfight, I don't need a red dot anyway. Okay, well, it's not going to be detrimental to have a red dot. And also, even at close range, if you have to make a very precise shot, like God forbid someone has a hostage and you have a small window on the hostage taker, I'd rather make that shot at 7 yards with a red dot on my pistol than with iron sights. And I guess, you could
always
argue
talk about the evolving fight too. That's something you and I and Dave have worked together on a lot, which is just, just because your fight starts at bad breath distance, what if you solve that problem, but that problem's best friend is also in a bad mood and he's 12 yards behind or 25 yards behind? You don't know. Like, who knows what your fight, if you knew when your fight was going to be, this is also not original, but if you knew when your fight was going to be, stay home that day. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, so the whole thing of I'm not going to need it at this distance. I mean, well, then I hope to God for you, like that's where it happens, or better yet, that it doesn't happen at all. But I mean, I do think, again, you need to train everything, but if you train the essential skills, the sights are just the sight. And the red dot is a way easier sighting system to use than traditional iron sights, which tend to be small with a short sight radius, more difficult to align accurately at targets at distance. And you have to balance the focal planes of the target, the front sight, the rear sight, your eye. It's just much more of a balancing act than having a consistent draw and presentation and getting the gun between you and the threat, and the red dot, because of the practice you've put in, appearing where it should be and being superimposed onto the target. Press the trigger, go to town.
Well said, brother. Have you had a chance to mess with the KOA yet?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We saw that. We got an early presentation of that out at my last OSG roundtable, which for those people that don't know, as a big publishing house, it was an opportunity to invite advertisers, sponsors, manufacturers with interesting and new products to kind of give the editors and the content creators early access to them. Helped us build our editorial calendars, prepare for what's coming. And the KOA was on that list this past year. Yeah,
it was very cool. I got to mess with it in Sweden before it was launched, and it was very impressive. I think it's going to do really well. I think it was one of the biggest hits at SHOT Show. I could be a little biased, but I truly believe that. So I think it'll do well. I'm looking forward to getting a Glock with a KOA on it. I've been told that I'm on the list, and so I'm anxiously awaiting it.
Who's making this list? That's what I got to find out about.
Yeah, I think I crossed you off and put my name up there. Anyway, it was done with love, bro. So I appreciate you sitting down with us today, Joe, as we kind of wrap up here. Tell us where people can go to find out about Silencer Central.
Yeah, so if you're interested in buying a suppressor, there is absolutely no easier way than doing it through Silencer Central, and we sell everybody's product. So you can go to silencercentral.com and you can shop there, and our experts will help walk you through the entire process until the suppressor is delivered to your door. And if you are interested in absolutely the most badass suppressors out there, check out banishsuppressors.com.
Thanks a lot, Joe.
Thanks, my man.
That's a wrap for this episode with Joe Kurtenbach. If this show resonated with you, be sure and let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Aimpoint Taking Aim podcast. We'll see you next time.